Hello and welcome to another episode of Student Affairs Live. Student Affairs Live is your weekly professional development show for student affairs professionals on topics that student affairs professionals want to learn more about. Folks, my name is Eric Stoller. I'm the host of Student Affairs Live. We've got a great show for you today. I'm really excited, and it looks like folks are already tweeting away. As always, feel free to use the SA Live hashtag. That's #SA Live. It's awesome. We're going to be tweeting your questions, answering things. People tweet out resources during the show. All kinds of neat things happen. So please feel free to use #SA Live. As always, I want to give a quick shout out to HigherEdLive. Student Affairs Live is part of the HigherEdLive network. For tweets and action and resources, please follow @HigherEdLive. Ardith, my intern, will be tweeting all episode long. All sorts of resources, all sorts of great things. Folks, Student Affairs Live would not be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. That happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we're sending out a tweet with that link right now. So folks, great show today. I think we're going to have some technical difficulties though with the video. It's just not our thing today. So I think my guests are going to actually be on sort of in podcast style, just via audio. And I'll do some transitions, some effects, etc. So bear with us with that. Also, I want to just point out that Ustream has changed some of their things with advertising. And there might be some mid-show ads. So again, bear with us as we look for a different solution. We're looking right now at potentially looking at live stream or Adobe Connect. So again, if you get a mid-show ad, we're going to try to get away from Ustream because of that. So again, bear with us. So folks, busy week coming up for us here. I'm actually going to be going to the National Conference on Student Recruitment, Marketing, and Retention next week. It's put on by Noel Levitz. It's an awesome looking conference. They're going to have a ton of resources. And we're going to host a tweet up on Wednesday night next week. Hope it's going to have a decent amount of turnout. Again, this conference for folks who are interested in social media, communications, marketing, and the retention of students, it's going to be the place to be next week in Denver. And hopefully a little cooler than some of the places that we've been, including New Orleans and here in Columbia, where it's a little warm. So as always, folks, I like to do a little feature on the show that I like to call Challenge and Support. That's right, Higher Ed News. So let's jump into it right now, and I'll go to my first news item. Saw this on the web the other day, and I thought it was really interesting because one of the things we talk about with Facebook and legal issues and universities is there's not a lot of case law out there, and it looks like this might be some interesting case law that just came out from the Minnesota Court of Appeals that upheld the University of Minnesota's right to discipline a student in a mortuary sciences class who made jokes about a cadaver and made threats on their Facebook page. So that's interesting really because we haven't seen a lot of things like this where there's been some litigation, some actual legal precedent that we could look to for those of us that work in student affairs, work in student conduct, and need access to some case law and some examples of this. So definitely give that a read. That's from Minnesota Public Radio. I found this, it was a little bit late, but a little late than never, I suppose you could say. I found this on the ACPA website, and it's about the DREAM Act. And Greg Roberts, the executive director of ACPA, gave some testimony up to the Hill, to Senator Dick Durbin, in support of the DREAM Act, representing ACPA. And it was really, I thought, kind of remarkable because you don't see that a lot from our associations sort of being that visible about an issue that is kind of controversial. A lot of folks have very polarized opinions about the DREAM Act, and I thought that it was a really good read. Take a look at that. You know, the biggest thing I thought that was really important was that with this was that it said that as educators, we welcome the vision to become a part of the educational opportunity to increase the educational attainment of potentially millions of young men and women who desire to continue their education and to fulfill their dream to be a benefactor and contributor to the American dream. And I just think that, you know, that's really well said. Really glad that ACPA is doing that in support of the DREAM Act because it is a very important issue right now facing this country and those of us that work within higher education. Speaking of higher education, another bit of news here from Diverse Issues in Higher Education, talking about how state colleges are seeking more out-of-state / international students, basically as a way of sort of bolstering their income because out-of-state students or international students pay more via out-of-state tuition. And there's a lot of folks who are sort of critical of this because what does that say to the folks who are at a land grant institution. That the mission usually is all about serving the folks in that state. And so there's some interesting things here going on with the financing of higher education, and I just thought it was a really interesting article. Referenced some folks from ACRO, the Admissions and Registrars Association, so definitely take a look at that one. Noel Levitz, who's, by the way, putting on that national conference on student recruitment and retention, came out with their E-Expectations report of 2011, and it talks about sort of the expectations of prospective college students and their parents. And I thought that one of the things that was interesting here was sort of this chart that breaks down what students say and then what their students say and how that differs. And things like 9% of students that they polled have Twitter accounts versus 5% of their parents. A lot of students were watching videos on the college's websites. Interestingly enough, between the students and their parents, 86% of the students use email, as well as 80% of their parents use email. So email definitely not a sort of dead medium, as a lot of folks have been saying. And it said here that 93% of the students who use email provided an address to a college, or the address that they provided to the college, they check it almost always, at least once a week, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing, because we say that students aren't checking email. At least they're checking, according to this research, once a week. Last but not least, a lot of schools talk about the SAT. They talk about standardized testing and how there's some bias and how they're not necessarily using it for admissions. Yet at the same time, in this article from Bloomberg, folks are buying lists still. They're buying the test scores from students, and they're using it to build their classes. And so it's getting a bit controversial, because people are saying, on one hand, from the enrollment management perspective, that we have to use certain predictors, certain success predictors, to bring in students to create classes. Yet at the same time, we're saying that there's bias inherent in standardized testing that makes it not necessarily an equitable indicator for who should be admitted and who shouldn't be admitted, that kind of thing. So, interesting article from Bloomberg, because it's sort of folks kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth, I guess you could say, in a way. So folks, I do apologize again if you're getting the midstream ads. We're going to work on a new solution for that. And I've got folks on the line here. We don't have video today for my guests because we've just had some technical issues, and I do apologize for that. But we're going to have an interesting conversation nonetheless, and I will show a little graphic here of them. And I'm going to give a quick introduction to my guests before I bring them on here. I've got David DeCoste. He's the Director of Campus Ethics at the Markula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And among the co-curricular projects he works on with students are peer-led fellowship programs in applied ethics for undergrads. Under his direction, fellows have convened student meetings, blogs, and other discussions on topics from sexuality to sustainability. And he has his PhD in theological ethics from Boston College. I'm also joined today by Miriam Schulman. Miriam has worked for Santa Clara University for 30 years, originally as a faculty member in the Department of Communications, and since 1995 she served as the Communications Director for the Ethics Center. And the center's website offers more than 1,000 pages of resources on applied ethics and is visited more than 2 million by more than 2 million people annually. Miriam is a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism. So Miriam and David, welcome to the show.
Thanks Eric.
Thanks for having us.
And I will be flashing periodically to your symbol here. I've got your the Big Q Ethics logo. So whenever you're on the air talking, I'll definitely do that. We'll kind of run the show today like a podcast. I found out about you two via the Big Q Ethics Twitter account. I was followed by the account, and I followed it back, and then I saw that there was an article in Inside Higher Ed the other day about the program and about the center. Could you talk a little bit about the Big Q Ethics? What is it, and why are you doing it?
Well, the Big Q is a social media campaign to involve undergrads in talking about the ethical issues in their everyday lives online. We had, in 2006, collected 130 narratives from students all over the country about ethical decision points in their lives as students. And we were trying to figure out the best way to communicate with students about it. Originally, we thought a book, and then we thought, if Aunt Gertrude gives you this book for high school graduation, will you really look at it? Maybe it would be better for us to go out where students are already communicating and that would obviously be on social media. So the Big Q has a Facebook page and a blog and some other elements to it that try to take advantage of the communal nature of social media to get students talking to each other and to us. We always provide for any case that we post ethics perspective, so that we hope that these issues that we know all students are confronting, should I rush a fraternity? Should I live in a residence hall that's specifically racially themed? Should I call the EMTs when my roommate has passed out from drinking too much? All have an ethical issue aspect to them, and that's what we want students to kind of connect with.
Okay, fantastic. Well, you tweet a lot, you put a lot out there, and you mentioned some of the issues that students are facing from an ethical perspective right now. I've seen a blog post, I believe it was called the Top 10. What are some of the key issues right now, sort of the prevailing ethical issues that students are facing?
Well, what we did the Top 10, especially for freshmen, and certainly some of it is how do I disconnect from home? You know, how do I deal with helicopter parents? Should my parents get to see my grades? Can they have a role in what major I choose? There are the perennial favorites like cheating and its various ramifications. There are the sort of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So nothing probably that's new exactly, although there are some cyber issues that are a little bit new since we started the project. But I'm sure they're the things that your audience is dealing with all the time in student affairs.
Well, absolutely, and I was just going to ask you about that in terms of what sort of collaborative efforts have you made? I know that the Big Q is sort of your communications vehicle, but the center, you do quite a lot with collaboration.
Yes, we do, and I think the Big Q really is, for us, a kind of an extension of what we've been doing already, especially into the social networking sphere. But we have done a lot over the last years, and that's either through campus events where we have people come in and talk about topics of real interest to students, or is through the fellowship program you mentioned, Eric, in introducing me, the peer fellowship program we have, where we select 3 seniors, and their task each year is to raise ethical issues with their peers. And so it's not us raising those issues in the sense we really seek to empower those seniors to go in front of their peers and raise ethical issues in all different dimensions of student life and life beyond campus, what have you. In addition, then, we have partnered specifically with the Office of Student Life here at Santa Clara on a number of things. I'm working right now. We're doing academic integrity sessions for the incoming freshmen. We've worked with them on topics of romance. We've worked with them and consulted them on developing some ways of thinking ethically about student loan issues and the like. We really see the ethics centers, in a sense, our success in pushing ethics issues out to our students, to my mind, depends on our working with folks in the Office of Student Life, Residence Life, etc.
Well, this seems like a fairly new model for how things are done. I haven't heard a lot of stories from folks saying that they've been in collaboration with sort of an academic unit or a center like yours. I mean, is this something that's relatively new or unique?
Well, one of the things that we've been able to do is use media to do this kind of cross-discipline project, both with student affairs and with faculty. So one of David's students, for example, did a blog called The Technological Citizen, and she coordinated the topics that she was dealing with, which had to do with the internet and ethics, with various courses that were addressing those topics. And so there was a kind of a cross-pollination. And we've also partnered with the Wellness Center here to try to get some of the topics about sexuality to have a kind of an ethics focus, not just from the point of view of you should or you shouldn't be having sex, but really having students think about the kind of person they want to be, the kind of relationships they want to have.
I think it's also, Eric, somewhat a function. The Markkula Center for Applied Ethics is we support a fair bit of research but we also are very much an applied ethics center. And in that sense, we're always very interested in how this stuff cashes out in people's lives. And that really, for us, in terms of our mission at the center, provides a very natural opening to working with people in res life, in student life, etc. I think also working with the student fellows and having them be front and center, it's helped us to imagine better how to connect with students through res life, student life, etc. So it's not just us, helicoptering in with ethics answers and things, but it's really us allowing, in a way, these issues and topics to well up more organically. And we may think of them or they may come to us. Either way, I think we're tapped in much better now over the years and some trial and error in engaging with these different branches on campus.
And I think, trial and error is something that we in Student Affairs pretty much do on a daily basis. We try a lot of new things. One of the things I found on your website, which I thought was really interesting, was you had a guide. I think it was something along the lines of thinking ethically, a guide to thinking ethically, sort of a checklist. And I started thinking about that as something that student affairs practitioners could use very easily in their own work, give it to students, to student groups. Have you shared that with a lot of folks? Because it seemed like a really good document for folks.
That's probably our most frequently copied piece, and there is actually a PDF online called Making an Ethical Decision. If you come to our website and go to ethical decision making, that has kind of a one-page 10-step process that people can use. And it uses the classic approaches of ethics like the greatest good for the greatest number, or fairness, or the common good. And it's a way of walking people through the kinds of questions they might ask when they're confronting an ethical issue. So people are welcome to copy that PDF and use it extensively.
Absolutely. Well, I think Ardith is tweeting it out here in just a second on to the folks who are watching via Twitter. So in addition to that list, I was thinking, you say you collaborate with Res Life, with folks in wellness. How is using ethics and sort of applied ethics to affect change different than other models that are out there? Because a lot of times you'll hear folks in wellness, for example, talk about social norms as a way to affect change, to get people to change their behaviors through attitude, etc. How is what you're doing different?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I think in some ways, you mentioned social norms. I don't see those as necessarily distinct from ethical concerns. I think they embrace ethical concerns. I suppose what we bring to the table in a discussion, I'm thinking of, say, our discussions arranged with the Wellness Center on topics of romance. And I think what the ethics dimension brings to a topic like that, in a way, is I think it gives our students a permission, in a way, to really say, what is it I, Joe or Jane student, really want? What do I really value in terms of romance, in terms of my life, the way I see it unfolding with a partner? And I think that's really important. I think it kind of ups the ante in a really good way for our students to be able to say, what really matters to me? What are the values that really matter to me in my life, in addition to thinking about issues of health, of social norms, etc. So I think it's a plus factor, but a necessary plus factor to really fully consider these student life issues.
Absolutely. We have our, sorry, Miriam. We have our first question from Twitter here today that I've noticed. Heather Gasser asked, and Heather is in Idaho. She asks, how do you get students to talk about ethics without them thinking that you're giving them a lecture about right or wrong, sort of that dualism that exists with, especially sort of traditionally aged college students?
That is a really good question. And when we started the Big Q and we started advertising on Facebook, the question came up, should we put ethics into the ad? I mean, should we say right up front, this is what we're doing? I think a lot of times with students, they are confronting an ethical issue. They may not identify it as such. And sometimes they feel like, as you say, lectured to. So we hope to start the conversation, always inject, because we have David commenting and students who've been actually thinking about these things from an ethical point of view. So always inject the issues of fairness, of compassion, of honesty, of integrity. And you don't necessarily need to call that ethics, but these are things that I think students, they have very strong feelings about fairness issues and about the way that people treat each other, which is essentially what ethics is.
I'd like to add to that, too. I mean, building on what Miriam said, I think I really respect the question and the difficulty of that. It seems to me one thought here is, as I mentioned before, having students be front and center on these topics and not you in res life, student life, the ethics center, what have you. Because I think that students talking to their peers about what matters to them ethically automatically sort of disarms the conversation in a good way, or it really can disarm it. I think the second thing is, I think very important to consider that ethics is in fact it's about more than simply right and wrong. So Miriam mentioned thinking about honesty, integrity, or what we might call the kind of classic virtues. There are different approaches to ethics, and that I think is a great one, appealing to people not by saying, do you think it's right or wrong, but maybe asking them instead, like, well, what kind of person do you want to be in the context of this or that ethical challenge you're facing in your life? That question opens up a conversation that the question, is it right or wrong, just can't open up in the same way.
That's a great point. I was just listening to that and thinking that is exactly what folks need to hear. And I think it sort of segues into a question here that I found from Beth Sanders. And Beth is actually a high school teacher in Alabama. And she asked a question about how we can embed ethics into our daily regimen to prepare students in high school or college to be ready for these discussions, because you talk about the benefits, and there are obviously great benefits of peer-to-peer interactions around ethics, but students aren't necessarily prepared to have those conversations right out of the gate.
Well, I think in a way, Eric, I agree with you, but I also have to say I think I disagree that they're not ready. Because I think one of the things that strikes me working with college students, and now I'm thinking of this especially because I've just done 16 sessions of academic integrity in the last couple of weeks with 8 more to go with our incoming freshman orientation crew. And so I'm looking at these 17 and 18-year-olds, and I have to say, one of the things we say in those sessions is that, listen, we assume you all have done the drill on academic integrity already. You've heard the talks by your principals, what have you. But we also say we think the game has changed now. The stakes have gone up. And part of why we say that is that I think these students are ready to start assuming responsibility for their own moral formation, that they're not blank slates, and now is a time to start challenging them to really be more and to know that you have it inside yourself to be more. We can educate you, we can give you a lot of tools, we can help inspire you, but that's not going to spare you the responsibility of starting to make bigger, harder, more important decisions about your own life. So I think it's there. Now, I respect that the question has come from a high school teacher, and so I'm speaking about incoming freshmen to college. I guess I would just say that I don't think that we should be shy about challenging students even in high school. Perhaps not, again, in the sense of, is something right or wrong, but perhaps that opening question to them can be more, what kind of person do you want to be? I know you're 13 or 14, but where do you see things going? How do you make choices about who you really want to be? Not in a false way, but in a really true way. And I think that could be a question that opens up a conversation. It could be a very rich conversation with that young man or woman.
We also know that a lot of these issues have now been pushed down to the high school level. So, should I smoke marijuana was not a question that I personally confronted in high school, but I know that it is now. Sexuality, we know a lot of kids, I can't remember the exact figure, but are already sexually active in high school. So they're making decisions. They may not think of them as ethical decisions, but I think what we can add to the conversation is to say there is an ethical aspect to what you're doing here. How are you treating that other person? Do they have the same understanding about what this sex means in the relationship as you do? What does, a decision to have sex mean for you as a person? Those are all things that we know high school students are thinking about and choosing, although they may not yet understand it as an ethical issue.
Absolutely. And David, you mentioned that you gave a really large amount of orientation sessions it sounds like you've been working on. And I was wondering, could you share with folks some of the components that you're talking about when you're talking to incoming freshmen, to first-year students? Because I think a lot of folks in orientation programs, especially at public institutions, you're at a Jesuit institution, so structurally it might be a little bit different in terms of an orientation program, but could you talk about some of the components in your orientation session, the things that you talk to with these students? Because I don't think a lot of students get that at their orientation program at their school.
Sure. So I'm involved with the academic integrity sessions at orientation, not with anything else at orientation, but just with that. And I actually work there with Lester Deans, who is our assistant dean here at Santa Clara, in charge of academic integrity issues. And Lester and I have worked on this over the last 3 years, and I think we've come up with something that I think actually kind of works, meaning I see the students walk into the room pretty much dreading the next 45 minutes on academic integrity. And I think we do get around that dread and get them engaged. And I think it works in several ways. One is, right up front, we do acknowledge you've heard this all before. So we want to specify, why are the stakes going up? And for us at Santa Clara, that's one sense, it's very obvious, because in 4 years you're going to leave here, you're going to be competing for scarce opportunities with others. Academic integrity is going to make a big difference in your success in that competition. Second of all, we really push the question at them, what kind of person do you want to be? That's the framing question for considering academic integrity here at college. At Santa Clara, we really believe in educating students as whole persons, meaning not just intellectually, but morally and spiritually too. And we see that as the framework for posing the question, what kind of person do you really want to be? Then in the session itself, we've developed a PowerPoint where we alternate slides and do a 4 corners exercise. So some slides are very practical academic integrity questions. Is downloading a paper off the internet an academic integrity violation? Agree, really agree, disagree, really disagree. Walk to your pillar in the room. We think the activity, the walking around, is really good for them. And then we alternate slides like that with slides that are a bit more specifically ethical. So we ask, lots of people say that cheating only hurts yourself, but we think cheating really is an issue of fairness to others. Agree, disagree, walk to the appropriate pillar. And that starts pushing a conversation out beyond simply break a rule, don't break a rule, I think into more substantive ethical issues, and ones that we hope actually really start getting them more at the kind of core of their self in some way. What do I think about fairness? Where do I want to go in my life? What if I develop a habit of cheating? What does that mean for who I am and who I'm becoming? So that's basically it, Eric. It's acknowledging up front that they've heard this all before, and so therefore this is what's new about starting college and dealing with this topic. And then using a kind of more active oriented exercise, a 4 corners thing. We have group discussions after the 4 corners with ethics cases, and then we also use this sort of alternating format of very practical and very ethical. The ethics cases, by the way, really come from the Big Q. So the students talk about them in small group discussions, and then we hope to indeed route those students to continue a conversation on the Big Q after the sessions.
Nice. Well, and as I sort of pull out themes from what you were sharing, it sounds like one of the things that you're doing that I really respect and appreciate is that you're not coming at this from a judgmental kind of view, or we're going to punish you if you get caught kind of view. You're talking about it from a continuum and of an experience, and also of an impact on community. It's not just about you. It's what are your actions going to do to others. And I think that, could you talk a little bit about, what does community mean in the context of what you're doing, especially with justice and how we, how our actions impact others?
Well, in one hand, since I was just talking about academic integrity, maybe just to start with that topic, or at least address that topic in terms of this, it's always a very striking moment in these academic integrity sessions when people confront the question. One of the questions we pose to them is, would you turn in someone whom you knew was cheating on a test? Turn in to a professor someone whom you knew to be cheating on the test. And initially, all the students say, no way, no one wants to be a snitch, etc. But we then come back to them and say, well, what if it's an issue of fairness? What if there's a curve in a class? What if, the competition is somehow in the class is being kind of tainted by that person cheating? Someone's getting a grade, i.e., what about taking a broader dimension here and thinking about the kind of social impact of something like cheating, that it really transcends just the cheating person and starts to impact other lives? I think that's a really good moment, and in a small, very concrete way, a way for students to start to grapple with, yes, there are really profoundly important personal questions of integrity at stake and a matter of cheating as well as a lot of other things. But these things, these actions, they really do affect other people, your students around you and others. And I think that same model really can be applied. I know Miriam was talking earlier about some of the issues in the Big Q. I mean, even something like, roommates and a roommate being sexiled from their dormitory suite because someone else wishes to sleep with their partner in the dorm that night. And just starting and getting the person who's doing that, forcing the roommate out, to start thinking a lot more concretely about other people affected by your actions. That's the starting point to thinking about fairness and justice in a kind of close quarters way, to my mind, which I think can be the building block for thinking then about justice and fairness in much broader social contexts.
I also think, when you talk about justice at a small private university, one of the things that it's important for students to recognize is how lucky they are, and what the rest of the world is doing. And I think that Santa Clara really makes an effort to bring students out into the community, to do a lot of experiential learning in lower income neighborhoods, in different countries, and particularly in Central America, so that they don't only see themselves as the center of the universe, but really understand that they're among a very lucky few who are getting a college education. And that's also part of the mission, is to get them to contextualize where they are.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It looks like folks are tweeting away here. They're tweeting some of your best bits, some of your best quotes here. So folks, please continue using the #SALive hashtag. That is #SALive, and we'll highlight your questions if you have any. Ardith is tweeting away as @HigherEdLive. And I was going to talk a little bit more too about this program. The Big Q is fairly new. It's sort of your social media communications channel. How are you going to define success with this program?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we'll define it partly by the quality of the conversation that's going on. Numbers are great, and we hope to get them, but I think if we get students actually conversing on the blog or on the wall about the issues that they see and how they're trying to put them together, that to me will be success. So, for example, a few weeks ago we had a case about a girl who had been accepted to her first choice college, which was quite expensive. Her parents' financial situation changed, and in order to send her, they would have had to dip into their retirement. And we put this question up. Well, we had some comments from a young man from San Jose State who saw that question somewhat differently than the kids who go to Santa Clara. We've had people commenting from, Berkeley, from University of Eastern Washington. And I think they really, to me, part of the success is that their viewpoints enrich each other and bring up things that the other person might not have thought about. So, we hope we go viral, but we also would like to elevate the conversation because, kids are talking about these things all the time. We're hoping to be helpful and to say, well, here's a way of thinking about it that might actually help you in your decision making. For example, we'll be having a case on should I rush a fraternity or sorority. I think people often don't think of that as an ethical issue, but it is. And I'll be curious to see what students say about it.
I for one, wouldn't have thought of that as an ethical issue either, so that's interesting. I'll have to ponder that. Is that a post actually on the site?
No, it's coming up probably in a couple of weeks because we assume that people will be rushing in August.
Okay.
But certainly some of the things that the students who wrote on it initially talked about were, what are the values of the fraternity or sorority and do they accord with yours? Do you want to be a member of an organization that excludes others? What's the role of the fraternity or sorority on campus? And is that a positive one? So I think, when you're going to devote your 4 years of your life to a certain kind of brotherhood or sisterhood, thinking about like what that means ahead of time can actually be very helpful.
One thing I saw on the blog was about individual identity and how it impacts the conversation around ethics. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because in this conversation alone, we've talked about, religion, sexual orientation, class, race, ethnicity. How does identity affect conversations around ethics?
Well, I think it affects it in a huge way, and I think to some extent, in a way very positively, and in other ways it can be a kind of negative hindrance to, I think, arriving at a sort of richer sense of what we really ought to do in our lives. So positively, I think often ethics conversations can be, in a sense, like too meta or too rational. So we're floating up here in the stratosphere talking about, what the categorical imperative requires or some such thing. Important, no doubt. But in terms of connecting to people's lives, it's floating above. And one of the things that's floating above is the degree to which our students do really think of themselves in terms of these identities, the ones that you've just articulated, Eric, to some extent. So I think we've got to pitch our ethics conversations with an awareness toward the way that identity is so formative in how people think of who they are. On the other hand, I think what can happen is that identity becomes a kind of self-justifying appeal, answering all ethics issues. This came up, I know we had a case about Prop 8 here in California, very controversial topic, of course, within the state and, of course, across the country. I think to get at the ethical issues that are really at stake in that conversation, in that topic, an appeal to identity too quickly can stifle that conversation. I'm an evangelical Christian, therefore that's the end of the conversation, or I am gay or lesbian and think this way, therefore that's the end of that conversation. And I think we have to be, it's very challenging, and I realize even saying that may rub people's noses the wrong way, but I really do think in terms of having conversations, moving things forward, it sort of has to be an identity plus approach. We totally respect who people are and where they're coming from. That can't, nevertheless, be the end of a conversation. We look on that as being the beginning, part of and filling out the conversation.
One of the cases on the blog is called Poster Wars, and in it, a student puts up a pro-Proposition 8 poster, and another person on her floor finds that poster offensive and asks her to take it down. And the conversations about that have been really quite interesting, in the way that students see, like, what is acceptable in the realm of conversation. And I think it gets to a larger problem that we're having in American society more generally. How do we talk to each other when we may totally disagree with each other, where we may have identities that put us at loggerheads? Is there a way that we can use this ethics kind of framework in order to have a conversation with each other that might otherwise be very difficult.
Absolutely. Well, that's the one thing I like about your website is you've got some really tangible examples that folks can take and take a look at, read through, and it's not just telling us, sort of how to think about it. It's saying, here's different viewpoints, here's how folks kind of work through it. I mean, would you say that ethics are messy in a way?
I definitely would say they are. And I think in some ways that even the question from earlier in the program about sort of talking about right and wrong and your question about ethics being messy, I think just ethics can tend to be sort of understood almost as a science, like it's a theory. You come up with the equation, you punch in the numbers, you come out, there's a right or a wrong answer. That's just it. And actually, I think if you look at like the whole traditions of thinking about ethics going way back, millennia, it's really, to my mind, much more properly been understood always as an aspect of practical reasoning, necessarily messy, in your term, Eric, that we're dealing with particulars, contingent things in people's lives, emotions, experiences that are hard to necessarily make crystal clear and stick into an equation. And so I think it's really important, I think, for people to be comfortable with the fact that ethics is kind of asking them in some way to assume the responsibility for making what may be messy decisions. And the crucial thing in a lot of ways is to make better versus worse decisions. There are some things in life that are clearly right and wrong, no doubt about it. But so much of ethics is really more a matter of better versus worse. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a retreat into relativism. That's simply the way life is. And I actually think it can be very empowering for our students to realize that and say, okay, that's my call in this messy situation. That's the way I see it. That's my decision for what's better in this situation versus what's worse.
Exactly. So what if, folks want to talk to you all, what's the plan for the future here in terms of more content? You've got the Twitter account, the Facebook page, the blog. What's sort of the future for the center as well as for this project?
Well, as far as the Big Q project is concerned, one of the things that we have asked is that students share their stories with us. So there is a tab on the Facebook page where you can tell us an ethical issue that you have confronted. I've also am working currently with a student intern and will be continuing to do that to develop more cases from talking with students, because since we first started doing this project in 2006, there are differences. So, cyberbullying, well, that was not really an issue so much in 2006. It is now. So we're always on the lookout for kind of where the ethical edges are and the kinds of things that students are really confronting today. So that's what's ahead for the Big Q. And David could speak to the more general programs that we do.
Well, we're really just going to continue doing what we're doing. I felt over the last years that we've been more and more successful really integrating with our campus. We mentioned the residence life, student life, wellness people on our campus. That's been really terrific. It's given us a much more, I think, effective and extensive reach. And I look forward to doing that more and more, deepening relationships with those units on campus, engaging with others. I also would like, as much as we can, to sort of filter these things into curricular contexts, so both co-curricular and curricular, because I think the more that we can get stuff in appropriate settings into curricular contexts, I think the more our students can start to connect real-life issues with what they're learning in a classroom. So I mentioned the categorical imperative before. Well, actually, Kant, for as abstract as he is, it's very relevant to like how people live your life if you really sit there and study him. And I think it would be great for our students more and more to see those connections in a vital way, that how you think about something in philosophy or theology, it actually really matters in your life. It can really matter.
One of the things I like the most about your program and sort of the goals and mission is that you're connecting the silos together. You're not just saying that, you know, academic affairs, that even those that are in applied academic affairs aren't just in a silo independent of the folks in student affairs. You're collaborating. You're basically working in a, like you said, David, in a holistic way, because students don't live in silos. They don't see us in silos. They see us as their university.
I definitely agree, and I think that it's. I mean, to be honest, I think it's taken, you know, me and I'd say even the center some time to kind of figure out effective ways to collaborate. Not that others haven't been open to it, but just how to kind of break down our own internal silo in some ways and kind of get out there. But I think the more and more that we have, the more and more successful I think our programs have been. And I do think exactly what you say, Eric, that I think the more we've been able, in a sense, to sort of capture where our students are at, they're not looking at life in silos, or they're certainly not experiencing it that way. And so insofar as we can really sort of create a programmatic context to meet their experience, I think we can begin hesitantly to declare victory in some way.
I also think the students bring things to us, and that's one of the advantages of doing these peer-led programs. So several years ago, we had a student who was very involved in student government who said, you know, they did not have a code of ethics for student government. So what if somebody belonged to a club and that club brought funding requests to student government? What should that student senator do? Should they vote on it? Should they recuse themselves? There was no guidance. And so he spent his year as a fellow trying to and creating a code of conduct for the student government. And we currently have a student who's particularly interested in sports issues. So a lot of it has to do with just being open to what they bring to us and themselves understand has an ethical component to it.
Well, and I know we talked in our pre-show conversation a little bit about something, you know, like privacy. And it seems that privacy is evolving, it's fluid. And it seems like ethics are in a way as well, because the issues are always constantly changing, new things come up, and you all are sort of ready to take on those conversations.
Well, we certainly hope so. You know, certainly privacy is an area where there's a big generational split. You know, if somebody asked me, would I friend someone I didn't know? Well, there's an obvious answer to that for me. They're not my friend. Whereas I think that is not the answer that you would get from, you know, most 20-somethings. So there are different understandings of privacy. But I think what we can do with privacy with students is helping to understand that it's a piece of dignity. So there are some things that we want to have be out there for everyone to see. But part of how we maintain our human dignity is we have areas of our lives that we don't want to share with everyone. And, you know, the internet, of course, makes that more problematic. But students can, to a certain extent, take these matters into their own hands and be more careful about how much of themselves they want to put out there. But they won't think about it unless somebody points out to them that what they're thinking of as a private activity, communicating with my friends on Facebook, can very easily become a very public activity.
I'd like to also say, I like the way you phrase that about sort of ethics, privacy. These things are kind of changing. And in some ways, I can imagine, you know, people listening now or elsewhere thinking of ethics changing and that really concerning people a lot. Oh my God, we don't want right, wrong, good, bad to change too much. What was wrong with the old definitions? But I actually think it's really important in a way to balance this. So there are wonderful ethical traditions going back millennia that we have all inherited that inform the way we think and help us a lot to make sense of our lives and live better lives. But I also think it's crucially important for us at the Ethics Center, in a sense, to be poised in some way on the leading edge of some of these topics. Because it is the case, as Miriam said, I mean, who knew 8 years ago, 7 years ago, that we'd be dealing with thinking about what it means to be a friend in the way we are now, in the way that Facebook has just kind of pushed that, raised that issue with us. And you could go back to look at what Aristotle wrote about friendship, what Thomas Aquinas wrote about friendship. It's incredibly rich, but you've got to now see where the question of friendship is going and really go with that. Go with where students are thinking and really hear them out carefully, and then put that experience today into conversation with these traditions. And I think kind of great things can come out of those conversations.
Well, thanks for saying that. I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking, you two need to take this show on the road to the student affairs associations, to our conferences, because I think that folks who are watching, folks who are probably going to check out the archive later, would love to hear your point of view, because it's what they're dealing with on a daily basis, and it's giving folks sort of a new set of tools to sort of add on to the things that they're doing. You know, the folks that are in res life, who are in wellness, who are in conduct. I think they would love to have that conversation with you all, because it's a perspective that we don't often get when it comes into student development and the theories that we have sort of as higher ed professionals. So I'm really appreciative of what you all are saying.
Well, you know, I do a lot of editing for the center, and whenever I've worked with philosophy professors, they tend to say, well, Aristotle said, and everything starts with Aristotle. And at first I found this very amusing, but what I've realized over time, and I think really can be communicated to students without sounding really quaint, is that actually Aristotle said some interesting things about friendship. He talked about friends who are sort of friends that you use, and then friends who are friends of yours whose benefit you care about, and that there are different levels of friendship. And I think in some ways his construct is very useful for thinking about Facebook. What is a Facebook friend? Well, that may be the friend who is useful to you, but not necessarily the friend for whose benefit you are willing to exert yourself. So, you know, one of the things that I think that we can do is to say, this is not just some old white guys. Actually, there are some treasures here that can help you think about what's concerning you right now.
Eric, yes, I'll speak for Miriam. Thank you for saying that. We would be happy to sort of share what we've come to learn over time in some way. Hope that it could be of assistance to the student life professionals who are working. I've certainly really highly valued working with the student life professionals here at Santa Clara, and learned a lot from them, and especially learned, I think, the kind of the concrete nature of the issues that they face. And I would be happy, Miriam and I would be happy to assist others who are in similar situations.
I think it's a really unique perspective, and I just think that, again, it's sort of the natural transition into taking what you've done already at Santa Clara, which is break down some silos, and take it again, like I said, on the road. So I really think that might be the future. So again, folks, I apologize for the lack of video for David and Miriam, but here is their Twitter account. It's at the Big Q Ethics, and again, they're at the Marcula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And David and Miriam, again, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate everything that you've shared. A lot of wisdom, and I think that it's going to give folks a lot to think about when it comes to ethics.
Thank you very much for having us, Eric.
Thanks.
So, folks, I'll get this archive up fairly soon in terms of the video and everything, but I know that some of you are wondering, did he forget? Where was the unsolicited shout-out of the week? I did not forget, folks. I just put it at the tail end of the show here because since we had some technical difficulties with the video, I just wanted to push forward with the audio portion. So, folks, my unsolicited shout-out of the week this week goes to a very dear friend of mine, and it goes to Deb Schmidt-Rogers. Deb wrote a really amazing post for the Women in Student Affairs Knowledge Community from NASPA. And the post was entitled, The Secret Lives of Women. And it was just a really good read about some of the things that we as professionals and as individuals are socialized to hide some of our secrets. And these aren't things that are necessarily damaging to us, but I think Deb's post is really about vulnerability and being a professional at the same time, and about being a parent. So a really good post from Deb Schmidt-Rogers. Take a look at it. Ardith will be tweeting that here shortly. So, folks, we're going to take a little bit of an Essay Live summer break. As I said earlier, I'm going to be going to the National Conference on Student Recruitment, Marketing, and Retention next week, so we will not have a show, and we're not going to have a show the week after that, so stay tuned. I'll be sending out some notifications via Twitter, putting out some blog posts so that you know what's going on with the show. Speaking of the show, folks, we could not do it without the generous support of our sponsors. Student Affairs Live is sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to send out a tweet with that link right now. So folks, my name is Eric Stoller, this is Student Affairs Live, and we will see you in a little while.